Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you a wrap up of some books that I've recently read. I'll have content warnings in the description box down below in case that might be something you need, but without further ado, let's get down to these books. I'll start with some tricky ones, and one of the oldest books on my TBR that I finally read is The Talented Mr Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. I was very interested in reading this one after seeing that Andrew Scott has done an adaptation over on Netflix, so next stop for me now is going to be to watch that. But I did read this one. The best way to describe this book is it's about Tom Ripley. He is trying his best to stay one step ahead of the law and the police as he's done something terrible when a wonderful opportunity appears for him to disappear into Europe, and he takes it, but a series of unfortunate events happen, which means that he does some terrible things which lead to consequences, and he has to try his best to escape the police and the law so that he can keep living the life that he wants to live. I think that's the best way I can summarize this book, and I had a fun time reading it. I had a bit of a roller coaster ride, actually, I should say. So for the first 25%, I had no idea what was going on. I was waiting for it to get to the point. I've had this book for years, it's one of the top 25 oldest on my TBR, and I didn't read the synopsis before I dove in, which meant I didn't really know what direction the story was going to go into, which was quite fun. But because this is one of the books that takes a bit longer for it to get to the point, about a quarter of the way in it did, it meant that the beginning was a bit slow. Then we got to the middle and I had a very good time in the middle. The stakes were high, and also Tom Ripley is an incredibly smart character, and I have so much fun following smart characters trying to dodge the law. I think it just takes so much wits and cleverness, and all of that was shown in this book and more. So the middle was really fun. But then we got to the end and I kind of, by the 75% mark, kind of knew where this book was going to land. It didn't necessarily have a climax or an explosion point, it just finished and petered out. And I understand that's the point of this kind of novel, but at the same time, when I read crime, I tend to read mysteries, and there's a whole plot reveal and a plot twist, and this was just not that. So what I can say about this book is that if you are a fan of true crime but you want to read something similar to that but in fiction, you are going to enjoy this book. I don't really do any type of crime except for classic mysteries, so that's where this is a bit of out of my comfort zone and not particularly the book for me. I don't think it's a bad book by any means, but I just had a fun time reading it, but it's not one that's going to have a long-lasting impression on me. I then read a book by one of my all-time favourite romance authors, and that was Husband Material by Alexis, which is actually the sequel to Boyfriend Material. Now, I'm not going to witter on about this one for too long because I have a whole video that's either come out or is coming where I analyse this book with my best friend as we swap books. But this one follows the same couple in Boyfriend Material, and it's a 4 weddings and a funeral retelling. So there are multiple people in Luke's life who are getting married, and there's also going to be a funeral. The problem with this being a 4 weddings and a funeral retelling is that there is no plot to 4 weddings and a funeral. The idea of 4 weddings and a funeral is a structure-based thing, that there needs to be 4 weddings and there needs to be a funeral, and that is it. Other than that, you can let the story go in whatever direction you want, which can be fun, but ultimately this book didn't really have a plot. It didn't have a plot, and we were just following these characters going to different weddings and funerals, and my oh my, did the first wedding take a long time, and that wedding in particular did not shift the dial at all. Nothing changed within the characters' lives based on that wedding. It was based on the weddings that followed that they started to have thoughts and feelings and think about things a bit more. So that beginning felt really unnecessary, and it was just a lot of faff. It was a lot of following characters, faffing around, doing whatever they wanted with no deeper plot to follow. I do think Oliver, who is the love interest in this series, is an angel sent from heaven that needs to be protected at all costs. I adore him, and in this book in particular, Oliver is working really hard to improve himself and overcome a lot of the traumas of the way that he was raised in a very homophobic household and in direct competition with his brother. So you can see that Oliver is trying his best to work through a lot of emotional stuff in this book. What really frustrated me though is that while Luke and him have a lot of discussions about different things and elements in this book, it's always phrased as if one character is right and the other character is wrong, and I really didn't like that because I think those discussions should be open, and Luke as a character was not as receptive to the amount of hard emotional work Oliver was doing and untangling throughout this book. I was just very disappointed with how one-sided those conversations felt, even though I'm not saying that Luke was wrong. I'm just saying that it needed to be a lot more balanced in that dynamic, especially if you're talking about a couple and people they love. And ultimately, because of the way that this was handled, I got really annoyed at Luke. I found him to be incredibly mean, and he even says that he's mean in this, but I saw how mean he was to other people, and I also just did not ship them as a couple. I thought Oliver Blackwood deserves better, and if you're reading a romance book, even one without plot, the least you can do is make me think that the couple should be together, and at the end of this book I was really questioning whether that should be the case. So that disappointed me as well. And as well as finding it a bit boring in terms of plot and a bit disappointing, I do feel like this one read like the author wanted to write an essay about queer relationships, queer love, queer marriage, and the normalization of hetero practices being inserted into queer culture. I think all of that was supposed to be discussed in an essay, and yet instead we got this fictional book. I'm not saying many of the good things. I think Oliver is the main good thing about this. And I read it, but I was dragging my way through it a bit. And the ending itself was the worst thing. The ending was infuriating, and I can't tell you why it was infuriating, but it was infuriating not because of what it was, because for what it was, I actually agreed with this ending. I think it should have happened this way. I approve of the choices that they made. It was a good ending. But at the same time, because of the structure of the narrative, therefore I was infuriated. So I think that summarizes my complex feelings on husband material. Will I read father material when it comes out? Yes. Even though I feel so torn up about this book, I do think I'm just going to keep reading and finish off the trilogy, but also because it's Alexis Hall mostly. And even though I didn't quite love husband material, it did put me in the mood to just read more of Alexis Hall's writing. So I continued straight on to read 10 Things That Never Happened by Alexis Hall, and this is not in the same series as boyfriend material, but it's a spin-off from that series. The second wedding that you come across in husband material, Luke has a conversation with someone he thinks is horrible and mean, and that's Jonathan, and Jonathan is one of the love interests here. So this book is about somebody who works in a bed furniture shop. He is the manager and he has his boss. And his boss is basically telling him that his branch is failing and fires him. And in the process of firing him, he intimidates him so much, he takes a couple of steps back, falls, bangs his head, and kind of gets a concussion. And then the doctor says that he has amnesia, and he decides to go with it so that he doesn't have to remember the fact that he's been fired. And so his boss is like taking care of him while he's ill and believes that he doesn't remember anything about his past and who he is, when all the time he's faking that amnesia. Now, the plot, I'm telling you, it's stretching, but if you manage to suspend your disbelief for the fact that people believe he has fake amnesia for 99% of this book, you'll enjoy it, because I did. It was a very, very good time. I really, really liked this one. You can tell that one of the characters in this is supposed to have an accent, and the way it's written is written in that style of accent, which I always love to see in British books. We just don't see it enough. Jonathan himself, the love interest, is supposed to be a mean character, and it's supposed to be strong dislike to lovers, and I need to tell you right now, it is indeed strong dislike to lovers. Jonathan is mean with a capital M to the E to the A to the N, okay? He is mean, and he's so unlikable, but at the same time, nearly as soon as we meet him, I already liked him. If you like to like unlikable characters, you will like Jonathan in this. And the reason he's so mean to people is because of stuff that's happened in his past. So it was just really heartwarming to see him go on this journey of self-improvement and self-discovery, and also just becoming a better person and letting go of some of the trauma of his past. And I think this book talks a lot about classism as it unpicks that, but it also talks about queer culture and the difficulties of growing up gay in a community where there are no other gay people around you, even if they're not homophobic. I also really loved that there's a big family in this one. Jonathan has this huge, noisy, loud dynamic of a family, and as someone who comes from a big family as well, I really loved seeing it, and all of those characters were just so great to be around. As for a main character, he himself is a bit static. He has his own storyline that has to do with grief, but it's kind of shoved in there at the end, and most of the time he's just pretending to have fake amnesia and feeling a bit bad about it. So I would say as the main character, he doesn't really develop or progress or grow that much, but he is funny and he does seem like a very good complement to Jonathan. I liked both of these characters separate, but I also really ship them and like them together, which is what you really want in a romance book, isn't it? At times I do think the pacing of this one was a bit uneven. I didn't need to hear that much about a Christmas party, and actually saying that, this book is Christmassy and has Christmassy feels. But regardless of the issue with the pacing, I just really enjoyed getting to see their love story, see them slowly fall in love, and I really liked Jonathan for how he could be so confident in some areas and so shy in others, especially when it comes to love, because he hasn't had love like this before. It was so adorable and so cute, and I really, really liked it. And I think of the traditionally published stuff of Alexis Hall's that I've read, because mostly I read their work before they were traditionally published, this is my favourite. So this is a very good time for me to say thank you to the wonderful patrons who support my channel, and also I have a couple of books that I wrap up exclusively over on Patreon. That's either because I'm working on them or would like to make my thoughts on them exclusive. So if you'd like to hear my thoughts on Bookshops and Bonedust by Travis Baldree, then please head over to my Patreon and there is an exclusive wrap up waiting just for you. But the next book I'm going to talk about in this vlog is actually a non-fiction memoir that I read, and that is Sociopath by Patric Gagne. Now, I didn't think this was the book for me until she came into the office, because this is published not by my branch that I work under, but by my publishing company as a whole, and hearing her talk about this book really made me interested in reading it. This is about her. She's a sociopath, and she defines what a sociopath means, which is where you don't have any emotions. And what I really liked about this memoir is that it touched on a little of everything and in multiple areas. So the first strand that it really looks at is her childhood and how she came to the realization that she's a sociopath and what that can look like. And one of the reasons she does that is for the second strand, which is where she wants to help other sociopaths be able to recognize their sociopathy and know how they can live life as a sociopath in a well-adjusted way, and that they don't have to fall into some of the stereotypes that we have around sociopaths. She also spends a lot of time detangling some of those stereotypes, but also detangling what it means to love as a sociopath when you can't experience emotions, what it feels like to always be confused with a psychopath, the ways in which people used her, the ways in which she learned how to cope, and all of that is hammered down and nailed down into this particular book. I read it very, very quickly. I think her voice really comes through in the writing. It feels like I'm reading something that she has spoken to me very, very clearly, and I have to admit it is quite fascinating. I always find it fascinating and interesting to read about life experiences that are so different from my own, and this is that in a nutshell. I think I learned a lot about the traits of what it means to be a sociopath, but also a lot about the mental disability community and what it means when we switch names between different conditions, the knowledge that is lost between the gaps, but also what can be gained from people better understanding something and how that research is conducted. So this was incredibly fascinating and just such an easy read, and I really liked reading this memoir. I feel like I often end up reading celebrity memoirs or ones on a topic that particularly interests me, and this did just that. Sometimes I did think that I wanted a bit more on the subject of disability and sociopathy. I think she could have taught a little bit more about the ways in which she wants to help people, but I do understand that this is largely her story, and at the end it did focus a lot more on love. And while I found that interesting in the beginning, because yes, how do you love when you don't experience emotions? How does that come into being? What does that look like, and how does it affect the other person in a relationship? All of that was very interesting to discover, but at the same time I was less invested in the love elements to this and more so in the emotional and mental. I'm so excited to tell you about the first 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. I loved this book and I gave it 5 stars, and it became a new favourite. Again, I read this because I was reading some of the oldest books on my TBR, and I'm just so glad that I finally read this and that I didn't let it fester any longer, because it was such a good sci-fi, time loop, historical fiction read. So this one follows Harry August. He is someone who time loops his life, and he gets a message from the future, which is the world is ending, the world is ending, and there's something that he can do about it within his time loop zone. So he is doing his best to find out why the world is ending and who is maybe causing it. And chef's kiss. Fantastic. I think time travel and time loops can be really hard to pull off. There's so many places where there can be plot holes, where it can be difficult to make sure that the plot is balanced with characters and world building, but Claire North pulled that off with finesse. I just loved it. I think she knew what she was doing with the time loop story. And I really liked that this was historical fiction as well, because he is born within the 1940s, so it starts in the 1940s time, but then he lives until the 2000s, so you kind of get some of the contemporary society, but you do also get a lot of the historical fiction elements into this one as well. It had a very clear plot with very high stakes, and all the way through I could not predict how it was going to end, and the closer we got to the end, where there were fewer and fewer pages, I just got more and more panicked, because I was like, how is she going to pull off this ending? How is she going to do it when she's built up to it so very well? And reader, she did it, and she did it so well that I was just very satisfied and very impressed, because at the same time I was thinking, of course this couldn't end in any other way, but at the same time I had not seen it coming at all. Harry is a wonderful character to follow. He's so intelligent, and as I've said before in this vlog, I love reading about smart characters. There's actually more than one incredibly smart character in this, so I really enjoyed getting to follow him, and you can't help but sympathize with him, whether he's making the right choices or the wrong choices. And as this suggests, this is about his 15 lives, and so I'm impressed that you can see character growth all the way through this. Like, every life he develops more and more, but also over the whole narrative he develops, and I just loved the circular feeling to this book. It introduces characters, not too many that you get flooded, but just enough that you feel like you understand how multi-elemented this whole story is, and it's just so smart, and it's just so well done, and I just ate it up completely. I can't believe that I raced through this, and it just reminds me that I need to read more of the science fiction myself, because every time that I do, I have such a good time. And I'm so looking forward to more of Claire North, because this idea was so unique and just, it was unlike anything I've read before, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Poetry collection that I read is The Wickedest by Femi. This is a proof copy, and it's quite similar to what the finished book will look like, which you can see here. And this is a poetry collection that takes place across one day, and is set in a nightclub, and you are following these black people as they are celebrating and enjoying their night. But you will also go into characters' lives and see about why they're at the club and some of the stuff that they have going on behind the scenes of them feeling free and having a good time in this club setting. I enjoyed this collection, but it didn't rock my world to the biggest boom or anything. I think poetry is quite personal, and for me this kind of contemporary easy to read style is not my particular favourite, but what I will say is that it's a very good starter into poetry. If you don't read much poetry, if you like Insta style poetry, while this is not Insta style by any means, it's as easy to understand as Insta style poetry, then maybe this is a collection that you're going to want to try. I really liked how some of these poems were just a celebration of blackness, of freedom, of happiness, of letting loose. I think sometimes you need that. But I also really liked when it did those individual character studies to get to know the story behind the happiness that someone's projecting for that one night in the club. And I think to make this book go on to another level for me, I would want to see more of those poems where you go more in depth with people's lives. I would just want this poetry collection to be double the length, so we can get more emotional threads from the characters that we meet. And that's what would have put this book on the next level for me. But as it is, it's a really nice, quite easy to read poetry collection, and I think there's some people out there who are really going to love it. It just wasn't particularly the one for me. Another book I felt quite middle of the road about was Darius the Great is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. This is a young adult novel. Again, one of the oldest books on my TBR. I was really pushing through them this recent reads video wrap up. You are following Darius, As the cover suggests, he is a Persian American boy who has depression, and his father has depression as well. He struggles to connect with his father. In fact, he's struggling to connect with both of his parents and his family, and he doesn't understand why nobody at school likes him because he gets bullied a lot. And when, due to a loss within the family, they're going to travel to Iran, he's really excited and eager to connect with more of his culture and also to maybe feel a closeness to his extended family that he doesn't always feel with his immediate family. Now, the writing in this is what was my main barrier. It's very much, I did this, I did that, I felt that, I did this, and to me that's just a bit too robotic. It's one of the older YA books, and I just feel like the YA we have now has got a new level to the writing and a new richness to the writing that just makes it more enjoyable to read. So my struggle with this one was the writing, but it was not actually the narrative itself. It was a lovely, quiet story about a boy who learns about how he can make friends and learning about his own culture while living with this. But also he knows that his dad has depression, and yet that doesn't make their relationship easier, and they kind of have to find out ways in which they can connect and learn from each other too. And so it was a really lovely story of family and of friendship in particular and of culture and identity. But don't think there was going to be a romance going into this one. I knew that before I started reading, so even though it's a young adult contemporary one, and even though there seems to be hints of romance, there is no romance in this book. So I don't want people to go in and be disappointed, because that's not what this is. This is mostly a story about self-development and self-discovery, which are actually some of my favourite themes to read about, but I just think it's the writing in this one which brought it a bit low for me and made it so that I couldn't fully enter into the emotions that this book itself was giving me. So that's how I felt about Darius the Great. Right, this book took me so long to read, but that's because it was actually just so good, and that is I Promise It Won't Always Hurt Like This by Clare Mackintosh. Now, you might know Clare Mackintosh for her thriller books, but this is actually her non-fiction book where she talks about grief, and she gives promises, 18 promises to people who are grieving, and these are promises that she thinks will help you through the grieving process. Now, I've talked about this many times on my channel, but grief is one of my key themes that I read around alongside identity, and it is something that I think it's something that affects us all at some point in time, and it's really important to learn about it and to know about it. And it's really hard, even when you've learned about it and known about it, when you experience it. And even though I've read many non-fiction and fiction books alike about grief, I don't think there's one that I would give to someone immediately in the process of grieving, because that is such an emotional period and you're not going to be focusing on a book. But if I did have to give one to someone in that immediate period of grief, it would be this book, because it's going to help them through. I think sometimes with promises and assurances throughout grief, it can just be so hard to hit the nail on the head, but this really did. And whether you are grieving someone recently or whether you're still grieving someone who has been gone for a very long time, this book is going to emotionally impact you, so just be prepared for the onslaught of emotions. I've lost a couple of people in my life, and reading this book really brought forth a lot of emotions and memories and feelings, and it was a hard one to read, so I read it bit by itty little bit throughout several of months, and it did help me, and it did make me feel calmer and assured and not happy but at peace by the end of it. While talking about these assurances on grief, she is also talking about her own grieving process. Claire lost one of her newborns, and so she talks about what that was like, but not just in the immediate moment of losing her newborn baby, but also in the process of that grief as it hits her throughout the years, as it hits her when she has her next babies, as it hits her when it's the anniversary period. She really is so honest and digs through all of it, her good days and her bad days, and it felt very relatable to be there with her in those steps. Even though I've never lost a newborn child, my grief is in a different format or due to different reasons and different losses. So this is one that's really powerful and really impactful, but also really important if you are looking for a book on grief or one to give to somebody else. Please check your content warnings before reading this. They are down below. And then last but not least, I read a young adult contemporary novel in verse called All the Fighting Parts by Hannah V. Sawyerr. And this one is another emotional punch to the gut because it's about a young black teenager who is sexually abused by their pastor in the church. So I think that sentence alone shows you what this one is going to be about pretty much, and it's full on. It's full on because how can it not be full on? What can I tell you about this novel in verse? So I appreciate that it lets you get to know the character before the happenings of this, so you get time with her, so you get to see what her teenage life is before and afterwards, which just makes the impact of how what's happened to her changes her so very much. And while it is also about the sexual assault, it's also about themes of religion, it's about themes of safety and where you feel that safety and where you find it. It's also about this daughter who has a single father and how she struggles to connect with her single father, and how they manage to, if they manage to, find their ways back to each other, and what that takes and what it means to both of them in the process of what happens to her. It really talks about what it means to be believed, and it doesn't show you the specific moment where it happens. I always appreciate when you get books that don't do that, as well as books that do that, because sometimes you need a book to show you just how terrible and awful it is, but sometimes you also need a book that's not going to harm the people that it's written about as a community or cause triggers for that community, while also talking about the subject in depth. It's a powerful book on what it means to speak out, what it can cost you, and what it can benefit you. And it looks at the story from both sides of that, which I appreciate. And I really loved her boyfriend in this. I thought he was fantastic, and I really liked him as a character, and he was just so sweet. He's a complete cinnamon roll of a character, and I almost thought something was going to go bad in that storyline because he was just too nice to exist, but not in a way where he didn't feel like a realistic character, but in a way where everybody would want to date someone like this if they were an adult my age. You know what I mean? So I really liked him. And the only downside to this is that I don't think this is as poetic a novel in verse as I personally like. I love when there's a lot of poetry imbued into the narrative rather than it just feeling like prose but written in a novel in verse form. While this is not exactly that, I do think it could have been a little bit more poetic and therefore been even better and even more effective, because poetry is so emotional and this story is so emotion based. However, even though the poetry itself and the verse itself is not going to rock your world, it's still going to tell you a really incredibly important story that needs to be told. And I appreciated how it showed the religious effect, the religious trauma, and showed religion from various sides in this particular book. Really, really well done, and it slowly grew on me as I turned the pages more and more. So there you have it. Those are some books that I recently read and my thoughts on those books. Please let me know in the comment section down below what was the last book that you read and what did you think of it, and also let me know if you've read any of these books. Do we have some in common? Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!